Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Oh my, I'm thankful for people that made it in person at 11 o'clock on a Saturday. And thank you for the ones joining us live and then later if you watch the recording. Thank you for taking the time to watch. But let's start it with, well, mi gente estuvo aquí también. My people were here too. It's really a way to, it was my journey. It was my journey in regarding realizing how much my family, how much our community was a part of this story, of the history, because we're not accustomed to seeing ourselves or being heard about, hearing about our community within those history books and those history classes. And that journey of realizing what a big part all of our communities played, and my family was a part of it. And it was just so grounding. And it was it opened the door to so many opportunities for me. It's also the journey of connecting to my personal story, my personal family history, and how healing and empowering I felt it was important for us, our community. And that's why I do what I do. So I'm going to start a little bit. And this is something I always say, when we connect to our past, we better understand our present and are more prepared for the future. It's a lesson I have learned since I started 11 years ago, and I take with me and the message I want to put out there for all of us. A little bit of my story. I started first very, I started very like, okay, let me see what I'm going to find, because I really didn't know what I was going to find. But I grew up very close to my grandmothers, to the women in my family. My mom is here today. That's how they're always present in my life. And there was this one, my paternal grandmother, she passed when my dad was 10 years old. So I never knew about her. And I always wondered, what was she like? Unfortunately, her story is a hard story, like many of our ancestors' stories. And it wasn't talked about, which is the other hurdle that we run into in our families. So I started, and then I found my first document. See, and to this moment, my grandmother, Abuela Faustina, even when I would say that, Abuela Faustina, didn't feel real. It didn't feel like when I would talk about my other grandmothers, because I didn't know her. I saw this, it's her death record. Abuela became real to me for the first time in my life. This gets me emotional. Sorry. And then I found out her birth register from Maunao. I found out where she was from. At this point, I thought she was from Cataño, which is very different from Maunao, for those of you from Puerto Rico. And I knew her second last name. I knew her parents' last names. I never knew any of this. And all of a sudden, I had information on my abuela that I never even thought I would have, and just having those names. And basically, Descubre Tu Historia is, see, I have a story with all my grandmothers. I can tell you stories with all my grandmothers, even some of my great-grandmothers. Descubre Tu Historia is my story con Abuela Faustina. Because of her, I'm here. And this is Faustina. After talking to the family, we finally got a picture of her. It's very grainy, kind of grainy, but it's the only picture we have. And there she is. And I see where I got my height, because she apparently was short just like me. I'm wearing boots, so that's why you can see me over this. All right, so one of the hurdles that I ran into is the fact that I made all the mistakes when I started, literally. There wasn't a lot of information, or there was a lot of information that was so overwhelming in regards on how to start. So I just started very enthusiastically. I think I made every mistake there was in the book when I first started. And then I kind of reeled it in. And then I came up with these 4 steps, because I think these 4 steps are extremely important, even before you jump onto any online platform, because it can become very overwhelming. It can become very confusing. So I think these 4 steps are a way for you to start gathering your information before you even jump onto any of the web platforms such as Ancestry or Family Search. And so let's start with the first one. So these are things that you can start doing from home. First and foremost, focus your research.
Do you take pictures of this, or is this in here?
It's not in there, but yeah, you can, it's okay.
I want that permission.
Oh, absolutely, it's okay. So yeah, you want to focus your research. And why is this important? And what does it mean? Focusing your research means decide on who you want to start with. Because if you just start with everybody, like I did, I literally started with all my 4 grandparents, and that did not bode well. I ended up eventually deleting the tree and restarting. And then I really did a soul search of myself. Who do I want to really, who am I curious about? And that's when I decided Abuela Faustina was my way to start. So it is important. And the reason why is important, focusing your research is going to minimize mistakes, and it's going to help you not attach information to your family or become a little more critical of what you see. You're not going to miss important details, because when you start very broad, you're going to miss the details in the documents. So that is why it's extremely important to really focus on who and what's your goal for your research. And obviously, you're going to be able to get more out of it. What happens if you do not? Like I mentioned, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to start confusing your family members. Common names are real in all genealogies, but of course in Hispanic genealogy, the Maria, the Jose, the Franciscos, the Juans, it's real. I mean, I've seen families of 15 children, 7 women are called Maria, and the only thing that differentiates is the middle name. So we have to be very careful. You're going to hit a brick wall a lot earlier. So a brick wall in genealogy means you're just going to go so far, and you just can't seem to find more information to go up further. It's going to be hard to track who you're working on. You are going to lose track. Again, because I can't emphasize it enough, you're going to miss critical details, and you're going to have a higher risk of attaching information that's not correct. So one of these things just makes you a lot more critical of what you're looking at. I always say, if you have just a tiny little doubt, don't attach it. Make sure you are able to find information to corroborate. Step 2, sit down, write everything you know about that person, that ancestor that you want to focus on. Write down everything that you have heard, the stories you've heard. And there might be stories that you're like, I don't know, maybe I don't think that's true. I don't think it's real. Write it down, because when you start the research and you start reading the documents, you're going to find details of these stories within the documents, which is a little grains of arroz that can that give you a sign that you're in the right path. Yeah, because you're going to find that sometimes the stories we've heard, either A, it doesn't pertain to the person you thought it did, or it didn't really happen when it happened, or it's all, sometimes the timelines can be very skewed. So, and I know this is always a hard one. I always have found this is a touchy one, especially in our culture, and I know other cultures definitely go through this too, is speaking to family. You know, we have those that love to talk about the past. I know my abuelitos, my mom's parents, they're always talking about the past in Puerto Rico and when they moved to New York. But then there are those that don't want to talk about it, the hard stuff. And my abuela Faustina was that for me. People didn't want to talk about abuela because it was she went through a lot. It was one of those hard conversations. And so I always say to people, if you're not able to speak to them, this is something that we don't talk about enough, that it definitely is something that comes in genealogy when we talk to family, is how trauma that a lot of our ancestors or family members went through moving or moving to to a country they didn't know, speaking a language they didn't know, or the hard things they went through in their ancestral countries. Things that they weren't taught to talk about it. We were taught to keep going. And because and focus on what the most important thing we need to focus, our family, moving our family forward. But then what happens is these traumas have come down the line. And some of us, especially my generation now, we're waking up to the idea that hard conversations are good, are healing and need to happen. And the older generation at times is not there yet. And I think to them, let's give them some grace. Sometimes it's not about, they want to keep the information from us. Sometimes it is re-traumatizing for them to talk about it. So that's, I always say, give them some grace. I have found though, that when you start and you let them know, some of them just start coming around. Some of them will start asking like, oh, ¿qué tú encontraste? What did you find? You know, what have you found? And then you'll be surprised and conversations will start, which is what happened to me with Abuela. Soon after I started hearing stories that I had never heard before. So I got to know her even better. And step 4, look in private family collections. Check out the old pictures. You know how people used to write information behind the pictures, the names, the dates. Old Catholic Bibles, or back in the day, that's a lot of people wrote life events in the Bibles. I have a client that she was actually able to find up to 3 generations worth of information in a Bible that she didn't even know existed at the time. Baptismal invitations, funeral announcements, wedding invitations. Our family members kept a lot of this stuff. And this is stuff that can really, truly help. I mean, I don't know about you, but my abuela, she has like boxes full of pictures. And also, it is a great conversation starter, especially for those that may be hesitant to talk about the past. All I say is, if you hear them talking, just let them talk. Just make sure you write everything down somehow after, so you'll remember everything when it's fresh in your mind. Another thing, so once we do all of those 4 steps, 1, congratulations, because you have started your legacy. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of this journey. Also, it benefits you because you have gotten to know parts of your family that you didn't even know, and it's extremely important to be at least familiar. Granted, I know for some of us, it's not as easy because we don't have biological family close, or we haven't been brought up with our biological family, but there are ways to go to help those people. But assuming you are somebody that was able to go through the 4 steps, you will be familiar with your family. So it will be something that's going to help you once you start the research. And that's the other thing, is that nobody thinks about the resources that are available because the information is just not well known. I didn't know La Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía I didn't know about them until I started. And these men and women have been working so many years in digitizing and preserving our history to a point where, at least in Puerto Rico, it is common to at least reclaim 200 to 250 years worth of our history, our family history. Some are able to go a little further, you know, because there are definitely obstacles. There's been collections that have been lost because of weather, battles, fires. But the fact is, collections are out there. So we're going to start with genealogy societies. And these links are in the pamphlet. And whoever's online, they will be emailed to you too. So don't go crazy trying to write them down, because they're there. But we have some of the Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía. We have the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Many of our families, our stories started in New York City. So New York Genealogical Society there has amazing resources also for Hispanic genealogy. There's the Cuban Genealogy Club of Miami, El Instituto Dominicano de Genealogía. All of these are available online. Instituto Dominicano de Genealogía, you're actually able to just search on their site. They have mostly articles, not actual documents, databases of documents, but really good articles done by their genealogists. The Cuban Genealogy Club has some indexing, which is important because Cuba is the only country in Colombia. Can be a little tricky when it comes to family search and what is available on family search. And these are just some more of the genealogical societies. We got American Ancestors by New England Historic Genealogical Society, National Genealogical Society, Genealogía de Colombia. Genealogía de Colombia has great, they actually have like research projects that they have for different families in Colombia, which you're able to purchase for like $10 or something like that and download it for PDF. And then for Mexico. I always say this, even if you start on Ancestry, especially for Hispanic genealogy or any genealogy, other than the fact that Family Search is a free platform, you can create your account and you can start searching for free. It is something that you will have on the side, especially if you're working on Hispanic genealogy. Ancestry, there are some collections available on Ancestry. For example, for Puerto Rico, Ancestry does not, the church records will not pull up to Ancestry. You do have to go straight into Family Search. So there's so many digitized documents that are not quite indexed. So you kind of have to go straight into the collection and look at the images that are just not going to pull up to like Ancestry, MyHeritage. So it is, and they're digitizing and updating this database constantly. It is a free tree platform. You can build a tree. You can only build one tree. That's the only thing. And it has the wiki pages. So wiki pages is one of the things that I do check when I'm going to start on a new area to get a good idea of what is available online and what is available generally. I go to the Family Search wiki pages. They're very helpful to give you an idea and to give you where to start. And another very important thing that people don't realize, or I didn't know when I first started, was Family Search affiliate libraries. So there are public libraries that are actually affiliate libraries of the, so let me actually go back. Family Search is administered by the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. So it's like, I would like to say the mothership of the documents, because that's why they are the reason why we have so much available. There are certain collections that are not available from home. So for example, Arecibo has some church records, extracts of church records that you cannot connect. Even if you connect at home, you won't be able to see. But if you connect from an affiliate library or a family history center, you will be able to see them. So those are like right now I have Spain collections from Spain that I'm going to have to go to an affiliate library to be able to look at those documents. So that's the only thing, but a lot of them are public libraries. I know, hopefully.
Yes, we have applied.
Yay!
Right, and I'm pretty sure we'll get approved. So that means that several, if not all of the computers in the library will be connected to those, to those resources, but you will only be able to access it
from here. So in the area, we'll have Holyoke Public Library that's in process. Chicopee Public Library, Amherst Public Library are also affiliate libraries. And so now that would be hopefully 3 for us, which is obviously that would be amazing to have. And the family history centers are just also part of the directly affiliated with the Family History Library. And they're all over the world. So the closest ones to us, one is in Hartford and another one in Worcester. There is also Ancestry, and then this is also that is usually available through other public libraries. So if you can't afford the membership, you can go to a public library such as Holyoke Public Library and also log in and access and do research for free. So that's very helpful, especially if you're from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, You can find a few, but I would probably jump directly to Family Search with the Dominican Republic. Ancestry can be very helpful with research too. In Puerto Rico, obviously, it is very helpful because Puerto Rico, at some point, you will find Puerto Rico, our ancestors in the American collections, which we'll talk about later. And also through Ancestry, you have access to other databases such as Fold 3, which is military records, newspapers.com, which is a newspaper online archives. There is the benefit that they do DNA tests. So if you are someone that does your DNA test, you can link it to your tree, and then you are able to connect to other matches, DNA matches, and do it that way. And just a note on DNA testing. DNA testing is not required for genealogy research. And I say that because a lot of people are not comfortable. Some people are just not comfortable doing that. The only time I would say that you might want to consider it is if you are a person that has not been brought up with your biological family. If you're a person that has or doesn't have communication, or just right now you don't have anything. Well, DNA, you might want to consider DNA test to see if you're through your matches, you're able to start growing your tree. Always checking documents and reading documents, of course, but that is one way to do it. But other than that, if you're not comfortable and you have information to start your tree, it's not required. Even us professional genealogists, we use it as just another source of information, like a birth record, but we still, even DNA tests, I still corroborate with documentation when I can. And here we go. The public libraries, as I mentioned, here in the area. And then now, obviously, Holyoke Public Library is in process of becoming a family history, a library affiliate. And these are additional websites that are helpful. hijosdecoamopr.com. This is Orlando Reyes. He's a professional genealogist from Puerto Rico and board member of the SPG of La Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía. And this is for free, he has created an index for the records that are available, church index for the records that are available through Family Search. Because some of these records are out of order or they're not in great condition. So he has created indexes to make it easier for us to be able to navigate the church records. But he also includes information on the collections because he's been doing this 20-some plus years more than I have. And so he's been able to get hands-on with going into looking at these church records, and he has great information. So his is, I would say, a must, definitely. And then we have the Spanish archives. Genealogía Nuestra is another very good website, and she has general information on different Hispanic countries and some other Caribbean islands. And then we have Eastview Global Press Archive, which also it's a newspaper archives, and it has a lot of newspaper for Mexico and from Puerto Rico. Another resource, Facebook groups. So there is a lot of Facebook groups. I have my own private Facebook group, Descubre Tu Genealogy, which is basically for people that are doing their research and just want to have that contact, one-on-one contact, or access to someone like me. Orlando is a member of my group. And if I can't jump in and answer, Orlando jumps in and answers for me. And so it's amazing backup, but it's for everybody. Anybody that I have people from Mexico, Panama, I have people from Cuba, all that are just trying to have a safe space to be able to ask him for more information or ask to clarification of things. Then we have a few for Puerto Rico, and these are great. Facebook groups are, especially the ones for these ones that are up here, they are very helpful. If you need clarification on a document, for example, if you can't read one, or you can't translate one, people will post pictures of the document and ask. And I never get to it because that's how fast people answer. It's very rare because people are so quick to help. All right, so once you have access to all these resources, then this is very specific to Hispanic genealogy, is what are the records that you're going to be running into? So you are gonna, in former Spanish colonies, you are gonna run into the civil registration records. So civil registration records are life events that were recorded, birth, death, and marriage, that were recorded and kept, or are kept, at the local government level, at the municipality level. For many of the former Spanish colonies, they started in the late 1800s. For Puerto Rico, it started in 1885, but I've seen in Dominican Republic as early as 1801. So it definitely varies per country. So you definitely, when you go in, you might want to check, when did civil registration start? Civil registration records are very unique in this collection, because they many times will contain information on grandparents, and will contain information. So for birth, it will have information on the grandparents. Are they living? What do they do for work? Where were they originally from? That is very unusual. You don't run into that in other types of documents. Death records. Some death records will include the marriage. So was the person married? Who were they married to? When did they marry? How many kids they had? And will name the kids. In the marriage records, it will sometimes talk about previous marriages. Why did they end? I had a situation in my own family where my great-grandparents, hold on, I'm trying to make, my second great-grandparents, they actually married after. So this is another thing you're going to run into a lot, is people did not get married all the time. Many times they started relationships without getting married. So they married 20 years after being together. So at that point, I had doubts whether my abuelo Senen, my great-grandfather, was actually Alicea. I was very confused because my grandmother had been married before. So the marriage record clarified it to me. The marriage record actually clarified that she had been married before, and named her former husband, Miguel Montañez, and it actually clarified that her two children, Antonia and Francisco, were actually born, were the kids from that marriage. So all the children that came after, including my abuelo, my great-grandfather, were actually Lope Alicea's, my second great-grandfather's children. So I was able to clarify, okay, that yes, I'm indeed La Alicea. Because there was a death for a little bit, my Montañez. But yeah, so that's how much information I'm not saying all of them do, but the potential of what you can find in a document. Before civil registration. So once you hit the point where civil registration started, Puerto Rico was 1885. Where do you want to go? In former Spanish colonies, it was Catholic Church. You had to be Catholic in order to be a Spanish citizen. So everybody had to be baptized, married, or buried through Catholic ceremonies. So in the Catholic Church, all those records were kept in the Catholic churches. So that's where you want to go. You want to go to church records. Church records are, again, great information. Some of them, the availability of church records does vary. In one country, it can vary from town to town. Because, for example, San Juan de la Maguana in Dominican Republic, if you are from that area, whoever's watching or here, it's an area that, unfortunately, due to the battle and the fire that occurred in those towns, a lot of the records were burnt. And there was some reconstruction done of some of the civil registration records and some of the church records, but a lot of them, it's a place that's common. You can hit a brick wall pretty early. And there are just in some areas, such as El Salvador, where records are just not available. So you do have to check. Puerto Rico, for the most part, church records are available for a lot of the towns. Towns that are part of the Diocese of Mayagüez and Arecibo did not allow Family History Library to digitize the records. We're hoping that changes at some point. But some of those records, transcriptions of those records are available if you become a member of the Society of La Sociedad de Puerto Rico. They were able, some of those were able to be transcribed by the Genealogical Society. So, and that is one way to get access to some of those records, but a lot of them, some of them go back. I've seen in Mexico specifically, I've seen records that go back to the 1600s. And this is specific to Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, as we know, we have a unique history because we were acquired by the United States in 1898. The United States does censuses every 10 years. But just please know, Puerto Rico does not appear in the 1900 US Census. In the first census that Puerto Rico, that they did officially of the population of Puerto Rico was 1910. So you're gonna go to 1920, 1930. The US did do a special census for Puerto Rico in 1935 and 1936. Then you're gonna jump into 1940 and then 1950, which is the latest one that was just released last year. You're gonna find them World War I draft cards, World War II draft card collections. So as soon as Puerto Ricans were given US citizenship in 1917, a lot of our ancestors had to go. They actually they had everybody fill out a World War I draft card, all the men available or men that qualified. So you will find some of our ancestors in those, and the US passport collections. So those are just some of the US collections where you will find our ancestors, and probably, especially for Puerto Rico, these are the first ones you're gonna hit. It is actually very common to first get familiar with our families with the censuses, and it lets us know where to go as far as the other records, the birth records and all of that. Cautionary tale, yes, and I know because everybody says it, birth dates fluctuate a lot. You're gonna find birth dates. I've seen discrepancies of 20 years. So take birth dates as a grain of salt. And I think this is very universal, especially socioeconomically. Families were not, were poor, and they didn't have, either they lived in remote areas where they couldn't get to the nearest office to get to register, or or it was just not available at the time. So I've seen registration done for people that were born in 1893 being done in 1904. So by then, birthday may not be remembered, and that was very common. That's also a choca a little bit. What do you mean they don't remember how parents won't remember when their kids were born? We have to think about what was happening in the island at that time, what life was like in the island at that time. And what is it like for those of our ancestors that were poor, and life was just about surviving every day. And something as a birth date, well, it wasn't something, yeah.
I just wanted to add that a lot of the births were at home.
And a lot of the births were at home, exactly. And that was another thing. So it was, so that's gonna happen, and it's just you do your best to determine.
I'm curious about the US passport, since Puerto Ricans are American citizens, like at what point do they start tracking them?
After 1917, yeah. So these are some tips for research. Obviously, read the documents when possible. Not all the time you're gonna find the image of documents, but if you can find it, definitely read it. Be cautious when you use information from other members' trees. This was a big one. I should have put this in stars. So when you jump into one of these web platforms, especially like Ancestry, you're gonna get other people's trees as hints if their tree is public. Be very careful. We get very enthusiastic, very excited, and I'm totally speaking from experience because I did it. I got very excited when I first started. When I started going so far where it just wasn't making sense, I was like, hold on. So sure enough, I went back, started reading the documents. 2 or 3 generations up, I found the mistake. Everything was wrong. So that's when I deleted my tree and started from scratch. And it's, so members' trees, just don't, I wouldn't link, don't link a person's tree to your tree. What I would do is, for example, if I'm looking for my grandmother, and my grandmother appears on somebody else's profile, a tree, I go to my grandmother's profile on their tree. I'm gonna call Amanda. But let's say her name was Amanda's tree. I'm gonna go to Amanda's tree and I'm gonna look at my grandmother's profile. I'm gonna look to the documents that she has attached to that profile. So I wanted, because she has a birth date, I'm looking for a birth date. I wanna see what documents she has. If I don't see that she does not have any birth record attached, and I can't see where she got that birth date, don't attach that information. You want to corroborate, so just take that birth date and you research on it. Go to family search if you can't pull up the birth record in Ancestry. Try to go through the images of the records, but definitely try to corroborate. And if you do find a birth record in that profile, attach the document, not the profile, to your tree.
Right, sometimes you see people who have everything sourced, right? Everything is the same source. So the source of the birth is the census, and the source of where they live.
Exactly.
And the source of the marriage.
See?
Is the census.
Exactly. Because what happens is sometimes people just get, oh, well, these many people attach this information, and just creates this domino effect. So my tree was wrong when I first started. That means all those other people, their trees are wrong. God knows how many. So that's why, do I say ignore them? Don't ignore them. Especially if you hit a brick wall and you see that somebody has information you don't have, send them a message or take that information down and research on it and try to corroborate it. So it gives you at least something to research on. So don't ignore, but don't attach. That's use it more as a clue. If you're not 100% sure if a certain document belongs to your ancestors, save it. Don't attach it. So save it until it starts to make sense. Sometimes there are discrepancies. It is common to see in Puerto Rico, especially to see sometimes the neighbor are the ones that do the registration of a birth or of a death. So, and in those documents, sometimes you're going to see a little discrepancy on the information that is provided, especially who are the parents or who are the grandparents. So you want to just save it and just try to look at other documents. If it makes sense, then you can attach. Genealogical research goes hand in hand with history research. And the reality is, especially for us from a mixed background, our enslaved and our indigenous ancestors, this is in many ways how we put pieces together, is through the history research. Seeing what happened in those different countries, because even though we were all Spanish colonies, everybody experienced it, had different experiences. For example, in Colombia, you had one of the first, El Palenque, which was one of the first settlements that existed of free Black slaves. And it was runaway slaves that actually found the Palenque and it was what, in the very early into the colonial times, and they lived among the enslaved, among everything that was happening. But that's a different story that what happened in Puerto Rico or might have happened in Dominican Republic. So it's very important to look at what happened in certain areas historically, to put those puzzle pieces together. In the case of former Spanish colonies, Spain or the Catholic Church did require for owners to baptize enslaved. So, for example, in Puerto Rico, you will find enslaved people in the church records. Sometimes in separate church records for enslaved, but you will find them. I will talk a little bit more about the designations of how to find the clues, because another thing was Spain did not keep registries of the tribes, of the indigenous tribes. So the way to find that is through history research and also learning the different terms of the Spanish caste system to try to find and distinguish who might have been your indigenous or mixed background or mixed line. Also, be mindful and who's the informant, the witnesses, and the godparents. Dominican Republic and El Salvador and Panama. Unfortunately, some of these don't contain grandparent information in the civil registration records. But if you keep close eye on who are the informants, who are the witnesses, and who are the godparents, It is another strategy to try to find other family members. And I was having an understanding of this two last name system. So, which is another hurdle that sometimes people run into. So have an understanding, don't be rigid about it. And this is why I say don't be rigid about it. Don't be rigid about it because you're gonna find a lot of our ancestors were not married. It was very common for our ancestors to start relationships and families and not actually be married. Again, they lived in remote areas, were not close to the nearest church, or couldn't afford a Catholic church wedding. So they started to live and have relationships. And so what happened in those cases that the children, when they would be registered, many times they would be registered under the maternal last name. So for example, if you run into an ancestor and it says the parents were not married, you might, and you're not finding the birth record, look it up under the maternal last name. So the two last name system, for example, I'm Alicea Flores. I have another Flores over there. And so the two last name, Alicea is my paternal last name. So my dad's first last name. My dad is Nelson Alicea. My mom, and my second last name is Flores, my maternal last name. And my mom is Vivian Flores. So I took my dad's first last name and then I took my mom's first last name. So that makes me Alicea Flores. In the Spanish last name system, paternal always goes first, maternal goes second. But don't be rigid, because when it comes to the natural children born to marriages or to relationships where they were not married, sometimes you will see that mixed around. It looks like you know what I'm talking about. So like, yeah, you're gonna find that a lot. You're gonna find that they're gonna be, even within their own family, you have siblings that were born to the same marriage, but some of the siblings their descendants carry the paternal last name, and some of the other siblings, their descendants carry the maternal last name. So you're gonna see that a lot, the play with the last name. So be conscious of the two last name system, but do not be rigid about it for those reasons. Yeah.
And especially with the, I think that our generation, I've seen people like give their kids two last names, but then it's like all mixed around, and I'm like, I don't think that's how our ancestors did it. Also the lack of the trying to stay true to what our ancestors did, but then the lack of education around it, I think comes up in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, I kept tradition with my kids and they have a hard time all the time. Important to go beyond this. So in Spanish documents, it is extremely important to go beyond the grandparents. A lot of people just stick to the grandparents. Because of the tendency to find so much information, especially about grandparents, it is important to identify the great aunts and uncles and their children, especially if you've hit a brick wall. That is one of the strategies. Many times I have found grandparent information that I need in the grandchildren. So those first cousins. Look for words such as originario, originaria. That means, and these are standard words that you're gonna find really all over the former Spanish colonies. That's the one good thing about everything is they use a lot of standard language, no matter where you're gonna be, in Mexico, the República Dominicana, all over. So originario, originaria means that's where they were born. Says they're originario, originaria, that's the place they were born. Vecino o vecina. When it says vecino, vecina, that means that's where they're currently living at the time of the birth registration, let's say. Legítimo, legítima, that means when a child is described as legitimate or that means that their parents were married. So that gives you a clue. Look for that marriage record. Now you know that there's a marriage record that you might be able to find. Now, if you see a child mentioned as natural, that means they were born to a union where the parents were not married. So don't go looking for a marriage record that may not exist. It is sometimes though, like I said, like in my case, my second great grandparents married 20 years after. So sometimes you might find one.
Were you born here in the US or were you born in Puerto Rico?
I was born in Puerto Rico.
And I wonder how that translates. I'm just thinking like, I know like I have my dad's last name because but my parents weren't married.
Uh-huh.
So how do we?
That happened
I
to,
have a question, but I'm not articulating it.
Yeah.
very well, 'cause I'm such a visual person.
I hear you.
But yeah, when I get my thoughts together, I'll probably ask the question in a better way.
I will say
That
culturally,
translation of like again, my parents were born in Puerto Rico, but I was born here.
yeah,
And so when, actually, I just discovered that I always thought my name was Maria Luisa in Spanish. And I just sent for my birth certificate and it's Maria Louise.
oh, wow.
Meanwhile, my father thinks my name is Marie Louise. So like, it's that translation.
You need to clarify that for your descendants.
From when like people who come here to the US and are born here, there's that maternal piece that's missing, I think.
Yes, so that I was gonna get into that too. So, and then one thing I do wanna go back to, so when children are natural, children, like my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, his parents were not married. He was registered under Agosto, which is his maternal last name. But they never married, but he always used Alicea. So natural children, I guess I'm assuming if they were close to the father or the father was in their life, they did, or they knew who their father was. Some of them would carry the paternal last name, like us. We do still carry the Alicea. We don't carry Agosto. But so that's one thing. But yes, when we come to the US, that is a reality. My name, for example, has many times been changed to Irisneri Flores. And I have to constantly be, no, it's Iris Alicea Flores, or Irisneri Alicea Flores. And my mom's here, she's looking at me, Irisneri. So, yes, so that's one thing that is very real. I have seen cases of Mexico when people come through the border too, where a lot of times that first last name gets lost. And their people are just carrying that second last name, the maternal last name. That did happen to us. I mean, I know when we first moved in the 80s here, I was told I couldn't use my second last name. So for many, many, many years, I used Irisneri Alicea only. And when I started working at Springfield Tech, I have my former coworker here. And that's the first time ever, 2018, that I ever used both of my last names. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I had the same similar experience when I came from PR to here.
Yeah.
I used my first, middle, last, father's last name, mother's last name, and in the school, the middle school, they said, "Oh, we don't use that here."
Mm-hmm.
So
That was my experience.
mother's last name out of the records. So then, as you get older, you do all these records, and then you're able to control what you want to put out in the document. Like in certain official documents, you want to include your entire name as part of your birth certificate. But over time, when I did like the passport, they took my mother's last name. So it's only.
I have the same thing in my passport.
Right.
My passport, I'm only Alicea.
My birth certificate says Geraldine Boyd Cruz.
Yeah.
Well, so I have to put the official document, but I'm like, hey, you can just.
Which makes it even difficult when we want to get that real ID.
They just want to stick to what they have there, and it's like, it's more, I mean, I had to talk to the girl, and be like, look, it's more complicated than that, and just, like, you're looking at an American system, and I'm talking about being a Puerto Rican woman, so that's why I have two last names.
Exactly.
So if they use like US documents or, whatever, like the US passport information, for me, they're not gonna see my maternal last name.
Same as me.
But
Yep.
if they look at my birth certificate, they go. So it's like, who is this person?
And a lot of us are in that boat, because the same thing, I got my passport 20 some years ago. So when I still just used Alicea. So now I don't have my maternal last name in that passport, but my birth record is different. So another thing was check out, so when you're important, and you want to check out church records from nearby towns too. Sometimes our ancestors did go to different towns to do or the towns, because the maps did change, so the map lines changed a lot in a lot of our countries. So that's the thing, you want to check out church records from the nearby towns too. So if you can't find those, so Manatí, you never know, you may be able to find them in other sometimes I know people from Manatí would actually go all the way to San Juan. I have seen people from Manatí go all the way to San Juan and do all the life events such as baptismals and things like that. And the census records, look at the neighbors and who was living near you, or not near you, near your ancestors, who was living near your ancestors, because a lot of back then families lived in clusters. So that's another way of finding other family members. And these are just additional keywords, especially to finding our mixed background. And I do like to be apologetic before I say these, because I know that some of these and that are not written, I didn't put them up, but can be offensive for us now. But back then, history being what it was, they were used. But we have mulato, mulata, which is a person that comes to African ancestry, Spanish ancestry. Pardo libre or parda libre is a person that was possibly former slave. But also it was used for people that looked mixed. Especially in Puerto Rico, it interchanges a little bit. So you will see someone described as mulatto, but then you'll see them described as mestizo. A lot of times it depended on who was doing the registration and what they perceived the person to be. So mestizo, mestiza person generally means someone from indigenous and Spanish background. Peninsular normally comes to that somebody that was born in Spain. So if you see that, peninsular means someone born, that person was born in Spain. Isleño, isleña is somebody born in the Canary Islands. Many of us in the Caribbean and some parts of Central America we descend from Canary Islanders. So I know, and this is a culture that's very embedded in Puerto Rico. A lot of us have, even the words that we say in Puerto Rico, some of them come from the Canary Islands. So if you see this, that means you're probably hitting a line of Canary Island ancestors. And esclavo, esclava, which is a person that was enslaved. And another terms that you will see, and again, excuse me, is bozal. That was used sometimes in Puerto Rico for a person that came directly from Africa. So because it is not saying that it happens all the time, but in our case, sometimes it is possible to identify that ancestor that came from Africa. Even though it was outlawed in the early 1800s to bring in slaves from Africa, there was a black market for it, and slaves were known to have arrived in Puerto Rico all the way into 1859. So, and then these I've seen mostly in Mexico, which is lobo, loba, coyote, coyota. These are also to distinguish mixed background of indigenous or African, or indigenous and European. Specifically for Mexico, if you see español or española, or in Salvador, I've seen it. Español, española is not a designation that was used for a person born in Spain. It was used for a person that was of Spanish ancestry. But this is the trick. Because of certain laws that Spain passed, if you had enough Spanish, you could register then as Spanish. So just because it says español, española, don't be surprised if you see someone described as mestizo, mestiza, or coyote or loba at some point up the line, because that just meant that at some point they were considered Spanish enough to be considered Spanish or español, española. So that's another tip, because there's a lot of people get that confused. This is where you can find me. I got my website, my private Facebook group that for people that are, doing their own research and kind of need that access to somebody. I also have I have an email list where I try to put out as much information as possible. And just remember, when we connect to our past, we better understand our present and are more prepared for the future and for our future generations, for our descendants, our community. Thank you.